How are we doing? In today's video, we are going to be reflecting on the life of one of the great cultural pioneers of the 20th century. He was the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor, a man who's been revered by his contemporaries and paved the way for generations to come. This is the life of Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier was born in Miami, Florida in 1927. Residing on Cat Island in the Bahamas, his parents, Evelyn and Reginald James Poitier, owned a tomato farm, and his family would often take trips to Miami to sell the produce. It was during one of these trips that Poitier was born 3 months early. Now, even today, a baby born so prematurely would be unexpected to survive, but his parents decided to keep him in Miami for the first few months of his life until he was strong enough to return to Cat Island, which is where he would be raised until the age of 10. He spent his early teen years in Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, before moving to Miami and then on to New York by the time he was 16. And this is where the story of Sidney Poitier, the actor, would begin. His first audition was for the American Negro Theatre, which was a place dedicated to the promotion of black talent, not only on stage, but also in the writing process and with the crew that were hired. He was actually turned away from the theatre because at this point his standard of education was so low that he could barely read. He was working in a restaurant at the time, washing dishes, and he tells this fantastic story of one of the waiters who actually helped him. Together they spent weeks studying newspapers after the restaurant had closed, trying to gain a level of competent literacy for him, so that he would be able to read scripts and be accepted for auditions in the future. When he tells this story, you can just see the gratitude that he has for this man. Clearly it would have been a defining period in Poitier's life and career, but you can just see the level of importance he placed on this kindness and generosity to help those in need. And in a sense, throughout his amazing career, Poitier himself would return this kindness to the black community, providing inspiration that anyone can achieve their goals, regardless of the obstacles that are in front of you. Eventually, Poitier began working in the theatre that had previously rejected him, but he still struggled. Being unable to sing held him back massively, so again he put himself to work, and also in an attempt to improve the clarity of his speech, he studied the voice of Norman Brokenshire, who was a notable radio personality of the time. Yet again, Poitier's determination and dedication to his craft proved fruitful, as he was then cast in a Broadway production of the ancient Greek comedy Lysistrata, before becoming an understudy for the 1944 play Anna Lucasta. In 1950, Poitier landed his first leading role in the film No Way Out, where he played a relatively inexperienced doctor by the name of Dr. Luther Brooks. Being the first black doctor working in the hospital, Brooks obviously had to deal with constant overt racism, and a central theme of the film is the distrust that he's met with. Standard procedures which any qualified doctor would be capable of performing were always met with resistance, purely because of the colour of his skin. And yet, despite this, his morality and ethics hold true throughout, saying, "I can't kill a man just because he hates me." This attitude that Dr. Brooks shows in the face of such vociferous hatred is an example of the strength of integrity that Poitier's roles never failed to portray. In 1958, Poitier became the first black man to receive an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor in his role as an escaped convict in The Defiant Ones, and in 1963 he became the first black man to win an Academy Award for his portrayal of Homer Smith in Lilies of the Field. A turning point for the recognition of black talent in Hollywood? Not so much. The next black actor wouldn't be for another 38 years, when Denzel Washington took home the award for his role in Training Day. Incidentally, that was the same night that Halle Berry became the first and so far only black woman to win the award of Best Actress for her role as Letitia Musgrove in Monsters Ball. Poitier subverted the expectations of black people in society through the roles that he played on screen, but also through his determination and fearless attitude as a man. Suddenly America was forced to accept a man that didn't conform to the stereotypes that had been laid out for him. He was an actor that conducted himself with such dignity, strength and pride throughout his career, but a great example of this is something that he mentioned in a CBS interview in 2013. He was talking about a famous scene in the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night. So briefly, for those who don't know, the film is about Poitier's character Virgil Tibbs, who is a wealthy black man accused of the murder of a white man in Mississippi. Now it turns out that Tibbs is actually a high-profile homicide detective from Philadelphia, and despite the case being led by a racist officer, Chief Bill Gillespie, who initially accused him in the first place, Tibbs is persuaded to stay in Mississippi and help solve the case. This in itself shows the depth of character that Poitier wanted to portray, but he actually went one step further. There's a scene in the movie where Tibbs and Gillespie question a local resident in connection with the murder. The original script read that Tibbs would be slapped for the mere insinuation that this white resident might be connected to the murder, but Poitier had it amended. If you watch the scene, you see Tibbs being slapped, but immediately returning with one of his own. Poitier said in that CBS interview, "If he slaps me, I'm going to slap him back." You will put on paper that the studio agrees that the film will be shown nowhere in the world with me standing there taking the slap. Now that scene has since gone down as one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history, which Poitier said, "I knew I would have been insulting every black person in the world." Now just think of the weight of that. To command that level of respect, not only for yourself in such a time, but for the entire black community. So here we can obviously see a man who stood for so much. The idea of fair representation of black people in the media was one that wouldn't really be discussed until much later. But Sidney Poitier understood the importance of standing in defiance against stereotypical portrayals of black characters for the entertainment of a largely white audience. This was again compounded by his role in the 1967 film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where he starred alongside Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. The film follows the story of an interracial relationship and confronts the deep-seated bigotry that was at the time considered to be normal in America. In fact, in 1967, the year of the film's release, interracial marriage was still illegal in 17 states. Director Stanley Kramer, who had worked with Poitier on The Defiant Ones, had a reputation for creating meaningful, conscious movies which held up a mirror to the often perfect image of modern-day America. He spent much of his career addressing political and cultural issues designed to provoke a conversation across the country, and the casting of Poitier, even from what we've discussed so far in this video, was seemingly the obvious and perfect choice. Spencer Tracy's character gives an impassioned speech at the end of the film, acknowledging that love is love, regardless of who it's between, and that the wider society's impression of interracial relationships should play no role in deciding whether the couple should be together or not. Despite all of his great roles and achievements, Poitier wasn't exempt from criticism. In an article for the New York Times, Clifford Mason describes his characters as a black man taking on white problems and a white man's sense of what is wrong with the world. And he questioned the idea that Poitier depicted a proud black image that all of us who are non-white have needed in this country for a long, long time. Now, obviously, I wasn't around during the time of Poitier's career and when it was at its peak, and for me, this assessment seems very, very harsh. That being said, although I don't agree with it, I can kind of understand it to an extent. Now, this for me doesn't question the amazing work that Poitier did, but it's more directed at the film industry itself. Now, between 1950 and 1969, Poitier starred in 27 movies, 4 of them coming in 1965 and 3 of them in 1967. He was clearly a man who was in great demand, and maybe this is slightly cynical, but we all know how Hollywood works. If you want your film to be successful, you cast actors and you tell stories that will bring in the most money. It just makes sense, right? So the argument is that Poitier's portrayals were somewhat inauthentic to how many black people would have identified in order to placate a white audience. In his article, Mason goes on to say, "Until the concern of movies is for the dignity, the manhood, the thinking of the Negro in his world, with its historical past, its turbulent present, and its hopeful future, there can be no true portrait of the Negro and no true art. Whites may or may not play a part in this world. The crucial need, however, is for the break with the concept that the world is only white and that the Negro exists only in the white man's view of him." Now again, I don't think this is a fair assessment of Poitier's career. If we just highlight the dignity and the manhood, this is what Poitier stood for, like staunchly. And I think the fact that he was so often cast as characters who were constantly faced with racism is an acknowledgement of the historical past and the turbulent present, often with nods to a hopeful future. And although times have changed and to an extent attitudes have changed, there is still a long way to go. But it's clear that Poitier's work has stood the test of time and is just as thought-provoking today as it has ever been. Sidney Poitier passed away on the 6th of January 2022, aged 94, and his legacy is one of a trailblazer, paving the way for generations to come in the film industry, but also changing perceptions of what black people were capable of in a world that sought to keep them at the bottom. He was a man of immense pride and dignity whose impact and way of carrying himself will never be forgotten. During those early months of his life, when his survival was in doubt, Poitier's mum consulted a palm reader, and she was given the words, "Don't worry about your son, he will walk with kings," and that he certainly